For most people, this time of year means wrapping gifts, decorating homes, and getting ready for warm family dinners. But while the world prepares to celebrate, something far more serious is unfolding. Russian soldiers are trapped. Ukrainian forces are closing in. And as the holiday season approaches, for many, hope itself is running out. In the darkness of night, a missile cut through the sky at incredible speed, traveling faster than 600 miles per hour. It was not heading toward a military base, not toward a command center, not toward a battlefield target. Instead, it was aimed at something deeply personal to the man who holds absolute power over Russia. John, by morning, the missile had struck Vladimir Putin's palace on the Black Sea. This was no ordinary residence. It was a billion-dollar symbol of corruption hidden along the coastline near Gelendzhik. And when it was hit, Ukraine wasn't just damaging a building, they were shattering the image of a leader who was supposed to be untouchable. This is the story of the moment Ukraine crossed a line that was never meant to be crossed. A moment the Kremlin is now desperately trying to erase from history. Blaine, to understand why this strike mattered so much, you have to understand what was hit. Putin's Black Sea residence isn't just a luxury home, it's a fortress. The complex stretches across more than 17,000 acres, an area comparable to Manhattan's financial district. Beneath the ground are secret tunnels. Along the coast sits a private harbor. There's an outdoor theater, vineyards, and layers of security designed to keep the place completely unreachable. Bend experts estimate the cost at more than $1.4 billion. Billion with a capital B. Linda, and here's what Russian state television will never tell its audience. This palace was not paid for with honest money. It was built using wealth taken from ordinary Russian citizens. While elderly people in Siberia struggle to survive brutal winters in crumbling Soviet-era apartments, their president created a Mediterranean-style fantasy for himself on the Black Sea coast. For years, Russians knew about this palace. They talked about it in whispers. Alexei Navalny's team exposed it in a documentary that was watched more than 120 million times before it was taken down. People knew the truth, but they were powerless to act. The palace became untouchable, like Putin's own Mount Olympus, plumbed until Ukraine proved that even Mount Olympus could be reached. For many years, that palace stood as a symbol of complete protection. Everyone knew it existed, yet few believed it could ever be reached. It represented the belief that Russia's leadership operated beyond consequences, beyond accountability, and beyond risk. Challenging that belief was the real objective behind the strike. Land. Information attributed to Ukrainian military observers suggests the incident occurred during early morning hours and followed a carefully planned operation. Reports indicate the use of long-range aerial systems and maritime capable missiles similar to those previously deployed in Black Sea operations. This was not a technical failure or an unintended event. It was a calculated action designed to send a message. According to analysts, the location had been observed over an extended period. Security routines were studied. Patrol schedules were mapped. Air defense coverage in the area was analyzed. Most importantly, planners assured the site was unoccupied at the time. John, that point is essential. The intent was never to cause harm to individuals. The purpose was symbolic impact. MG messages reportedly circulating from regional Russian military personnel following the incident reflected confusion and concern, with questions about how such a breach could occur and how it might be explained within the command structure. What those reactions reveal is something deeper. This event was not about physical damage. It was about perception. Lenin, in centralized systems of power, the image of complete control is critical. In some countries, leaders are presented as larger than life, closely tied to national identity and strength. Russia's leadership has long relied on a similar image, projecting stability, confidence, and authority built over decades. But such images are delicate. They depend on constant reinforcement, and once doubt appears, that image begins to weaken. By reaching a highly symbolic location. The incident challenged that perception. The message extended beyond leadership itself to the wider public. If even the most protected places can be reached, it raises questions about the strength and certainty that people are told to believe in. In the hours that followed, reactions spread quickly, not just among officials, but across the wider information space. Analysts and observers noted that the impact of the incident went far beyond the physical site itself. What mattered was former intelligence and security officials speaking from outside Russia explained that in highly centralized systems, symbols often matter more than text. Battles can be reframed, losses can be explained away, but damage to authority is far harder to repair. One former security official, now living abroad, described the situation in simple terms. He said that incidents like this do more harm to leadership credibility than dozens of setbacks on the front lines. Ordinary citizens may not follow daily battlefield movements, but they immediately understand symbolism. And symbols shape belief. Inside Russia reports suggested that state media avoided detailed discussion of the event. Coverage was minimal, indirect, and carefully controlled. The silence itself drew attention. When something important happens and official channels refuse to explain it, people notice. At the same time, reactions from within military circles began surfacing indirectly. Conversations intercepted and later referenced by analysts painted a picture of growing frustration. Soldiers expressed confusion over official messaging that claimed progress, while their own conditions remained harsh and uncertain. Some voices questioned priorities. Others expressed disbelief that resources could protect luxury sites while frontline conditions continued to deteriorate. These reactions were not isolated. They reflected a widening gap between official narratives and lived reality. Meanwhile, observers noted a contrasting reaction on the Ukrainian side. Analysts described morale effects tied to symbolic actions rather than tactical gains. Reaching high-profile locations reinforced the belief that the conflict was not only about territory, but about challenging the structures behind decision-making. Military experts pointed out that symbolism plays a role in shaping long-term outcomes. Destroying equipment affects capability. Challenging legitimacy affects stability. This incident, they said, fell squarely into the second category. As the situation developed, attention shifted to the official response from Moscow. Statements delivered through state channels were unusually intense. The language was dramatic, emotional, and filled with sweeping warnings. Analysts immediately noted that this tone was not typical of confident leadership. Experts in political communication explained why. When a government feels firmly in control, it relies on calm messaging and measured responses. When it feels shaken, it often turns to exaggerated language meant to project strength rather than demonstrate it. Several defense analysts privately observed that extreme rhetoric is often aimed inward, not outward. It is designed to reassure domestic audiences, reinforce authority, and discourage doubt. But it can also reveal insecurity. When leaders feel pressure, words become louder. Observers also revisited the idea of so-called red lines. Since the conflict began, multiple boundaries had been declared as unacceptable to cross. Yet over time, many of those boundaries were challenged without producing the outcomes that had been promised. Each moment weakened the credibility of future warnings. From an analytical standpoint, this pattern mattered. Repeated threats that are not followed by decisive action lose their power. What once sounded absolute begins to sound conditional. And conditional authority invites challenge. At the same time, specialists cautioned against oversimplification. A weakened image does not automatically mean reduced risk. History shows that leaders under pressure can become unpredictable. When symbolic authority erodes, decision-making can shift from strategy to emotion. Blands. This is where concern began to grow among international observers. Not because of immediate escalation, but because uncertainty itself increases risk. When perception changes faster than policy, miscalculation becomes more likely. Behind closed doors, diplomats and analysts describe the moment as a turning point. Not because of physical damage, but because of what it revealed. The balance between image and reality had shifted. As attention continued to build, analysts began focusing on the human side of the conflict, far away from headlines. And while symbolic locations dominated discussion, thousands of people on the ground were still living the consequences of a prolonged war. Reports referenced by independent observers described difficult conditions for soldiers stationed in contested regions. Long deployments, limited supplies, delayed compensation, and constant uncertainty created growing frustration. Analysts noted a widening disconnect between optimistic public messaging and the private experiences of those serving on the front lines. Then intercepted communications and secondhand accounts painted a consistent picture. Many soldiers expressed confusion over claims of progress, while their own situations showed little improvement. Some questioned why sacrifices were being made without clear results. Others struggled to reconcile their hardships with images of protected luxury far from the battlefield. These reactions mattered because they revealed more than dissatisfaction. They reflected erosion of trust. When belief in leadership weakens, discipline and morale often follow. Military history repeatedly shows that confidence is as important as equipment. On the other side, Ukrainian analysts viewed symbolic actions as part of a broader strategy. The goal was not simply to hold ground, but to apply pressure where it could not be easily countered. Symbols, they argued, force difficult choices. Resources spent defending prestige locations are resources not available elsewhere. Military experts identified this as a strategic dilemma. No state can protect everything equally. When attention shifts to safeguarding symbols of power, vulnerabilities appear in practical areas. Over time, that imbalance can influence outcomes. At the international level, observers noted how carefully actions were framed. Precision mattered. Limiting harm mattered. The messaging emphasized control rather than chaos, reinforcing a narrative of calculated decision-making rather than reckless escalation. In this phase of the conflict, analysts agreed on one point. The struggle was no longer only about territory or timelines. It was increasingly about perception, confidence, and legitimacy. As the situation unfolded, the broader implications became clear. The conflict was no longer just a series of military maneuvers. Symbolism and perception were shaping outcomes as much as equipment or tactics. Every action, every strike carried a message beyond the immediate battlefield. Bine analysts noted that challenging symbols of power forced difficult decisions. Leaders had to choose between defending prestige or addressing practical needs. Every choice revealed priorities and vulnerabilities. Resources diverted to protect symbolic locations were unavailable for frontline operations. That imbalance could shift the dynamics of the conflict. Observers emphasized when a leader's image of strength is undermined, it affects public trust and internal decision-making. Authority depends on perception. If citizens and officials question who is truly in control, stability can erode. What might appear minor can have outsized consequences. At the same time, messaging from the Ukrainian side reinforced restraint and precision. By focusing on high-value symbolic targets rather than civilian areas, the approach highlighted control, strategy, and legitimacy. Analysts describe this as psychological and political warfare, shaping perceptions without escalating destruction unnecessarily. Experts concluded the endgame was not only military, it was about reshaping beliefs, challenging authority, and testing credibility. As the symbolic impact of each strike became apparent, observers increasingly saw the conflict as a battle for legitimacy as much as territory. The message was clear. Controlling perception is as critical as controlling land. Protecting symbols while failing to address practical realities exposes weaknesses. Once the perception of untouchable power is broken, consequences ripple throughout the system. This phase of the conflict illustrates a crucial point. Power is not only about strength, resources, or weapons. It is also about belief, trust, and the perception of control. The impact of striking symbols reaches far beyond what can be measured on a map. It shapes the foundation of authority and challenges credibility. The palace strike was not simply a military action. It was a statement, a calculated challenge to authority, and a demonstration that no position, no matter how protected, is beyond reach. Every observer, participant, and citizen understood one thing. The rules of engagement had changed, and perception now carried as much weight as any weapon on the battlefield.